Look at you. Expensive suit, fake confidence, acting important. None of that changes the fact that you're under arrest for armed robbery.
Officer, there has to be a misunderstanding. I'm attending my mother's funeral.
I don't care whose funeral it is. You fit the description. Marcus Williams, hands behind your back.
Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but you've got the wrong man. My name is Marcus Chester, not Williams.
Officer Sonder grabbed Chester's arm and snapped the cuffs anyway.
Marcus Chester, Marcus Williams, same difference. Just cooperate or I'm hauling you out of this funeral myself.
What Officer Benjamin Sonder didn't know was that the man he was humiliating in front of a grieving family wasn't a suspect. He was the federal agent who would soon be investigating him. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The Georgia sun was already fierce at 10 in the morning. It pressed down on the cemetery like a hand on a shoulder. Heavy. Unavoidable. The kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the headstones and turned the grass a shade too bright to look at directly. Marcus Chester stood at the head of his mother's grave and felt none of it. He felt nothing except the rose in his hand. It was white. She had always loved white flowers, said they were honest. Colored flowers are trying to get your attention, she used to say, laughing in that big, unguarded way of hers. White flowers just show up and do the work. He had driven 40 minutes to find white roses that morning. It was the only thing he could do for her now, and he had done it without question. The casket was mahogany, dark and polished and closed. Her photograph sat on an easel beside it. Ruth Chester at 62, her best Sunday smile, her reading glasses pushed up on her head like she'd just looked up from a book. She looked like she was about to say something important. She always looked like that. Marcus adjusted the frame slightly, straightened it, stepped back. Around him, 60 people filled the white folding chairs and the spaces between them. Church ladies in black dresses with white gloves. Former students, grown now, some with their own children beside them, who had driven hours to be here. Neighbors who had known Ruth Chester for 40 years, who had eaten her food and borrowed her car and leaned on her during their own hard times. They were all here because she had mattered, because a life like hers didn't pass through a town without leaving marks. Aunt Velma sat in the front row, her back straight despite her 72 years. She pressed a handkerchief to the corner of her eye with one hand. With the other, she reached over and found Marcus's arm. She held it without looking at him. He let her. Reverend Timothy Winter stood at the head of the grave, his voice low and steady, moving through Ruth's favorite psalm the way a man moves through familiar country. He had known Ruth for 30 years. He wasn't performing. He was grieving out loud, in front of everyone, and doing it beautifully. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Marcus mouthed the words. He didn't sing, couldn't. His voice wasn't available to him right now, and he knew it. He had learned a long time ago to know the difference between what he could do and what he couldn't. 26 years as an FBI agent had taught him that much. You didn't push through a wall when the door was right there. He had pushed through a lot of walls in his life. He had earned his badge in rooms where nobody expected him to last a week. He had worked counter-terrorism cases that took years and nearly took him. He had sat across tables from men who wanted him dead and kept his face calm and done his job. He could not sing his mother's favorite psalm at her funeral. That was the wall today. So he stood. He held the rose. He let Velma hold his arm. The choir finished. Reverend Winter moved into the scripture. The air smelled like cut grass and flowers, and the faint sweetness of the Georgia pines at the cemetery's edge. It was, in every way that mattered, a beautiful morning to say goodbye. Marcus looked at his mother's photograph. He thought about the last time he'd seen her in person. Thanksgiving, 7 months ago. How she'd stood on the porch watching him drive away, one hand raised. How he'd told himself he'd come back sooner this time. How he hadn't. He was going to have to live with that. He heard the car before he saw it. Gravel crunching under tires. Slow. Deliberate. The sound didn't belong. Everyone who was coming was already here. Marcus didn't turn right away. He heard Velma's hand tighten on his arm slightly. Heard one of the church ladies shift in her chair. He turned. A Hargrove Police Department cruiser sat at the cemetery's access lane, engine idling. The door opened. An officer stepped out, broad-shouldered, mid-30s, hand already resting on his belt before his feet were fully on the ground. His eyes moved across the gathering the way a man scans a room he's already decided to own. They stopped on Marcus. Reverend Winter's voice continued, steady and faithful, filling the warm air with scripture. The officer started walking toward them. Reverend Winter stopped mid-sentence. He didn't mean to. It just happened, the way anyone stops when something wrong enters a sacred space. His voice cut off cleanly, like a radio switching off, and the silence that replaced it was immediate and total. 60 people felt it at once. Heads turned, chairs shifted. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve, and the mother didn't look down. Everyone was looking at the officer. He walked through the outer ring of mourners without slowing. No acknowledgement of the casket. No nod to the reverend. No reading of the room. He moved like a man who had already decided what this was before he arrived. And nothing he saw was going to change that. Deputy Franklin Greaves appeared at the cemetery gate behind him, parking his cruiser on the access lane. He stayed there. He didn't follow Sonder in. His hands were at his sides, and his face had gone carefully, deliberately blank. The face of a man trying hard not to look like he was thinking what he was thinking. Sonder stopped 6 feet from Marcus. "Sir." His voice was loud. Too loud for a cemetery. Too loud for a funeral. Loud enough that the last 2 rows could hear it clearly. "Step forward. I have an active warrant for your arrest." The words went through the gathering like a current. Velma's hand clamped down on Marcus's arm. Someone gasped. Reverend Winter took 1 slow step forward, his Bible held against his chest. Marcus turned to face Sonder fully. His expression didn't change. Not one muscle moved in his face. He had been in rooms with armed men, with violent men, with men who had nothing left to lose. He knew how to stand still when everything in the air was telling you to move. "Officer." His voice was quiet, controlled. "This is my mother's funeral. Whatever you think you have, it isn't for me." Marcus D. Williams. Sonder pulled the warrant sheet from his breast pocket and held it up like it settled everything. "Armed robbery, Fulton County." "That you?" "My name is Marcus Chester, not Williams." "ID." Marcus moved slowly. Both hands visible, deliberate. Each motion announced before he made it. The way a man moves when he knows exactly how fast a situation can turn, and he refuses to give it any help. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced his wallet. He opened it fully and held it out. The FBI badge caught the morning sun, gold and unmistakable. Beside it, his federal credentials, and below that, his driver's license, clear, laminated, reading without any ambiguity. Marcus Jerome Chester. Sonder looked at it. 1 second. 2. 3. Documents can be forged. 4 words. And those 4 words cracked something open in the gathering. Not loudly, not at first. It started with Velma. A sound came out of her that wasn't quite a word, wasn't quite a cry. It was the sound of a woman who had lived 72 years and recognized exactly what she was watching. A woman who had seen this before, in different clothes, with different paperwork, in different decades. The sound carried everything. "That's her son!" A woman's voice from the middle rows, sharp and trembling. "He showed you his name." Reverend Winter stepped forward. "Officer, this man is a federal agent. He is burying his mother today. I am asking you respectfully." "Sir, step back." Sonder didn't look at the Reverend. His eyes hadn't left Marcus. Marcus lowered his wallet slowly. His voice dropped even further. So quiet now that Sonder had to focus to hear it, which was exactly the point. "Officer, think very carefully about what you're doing right now." Sonder reached for his cuffs. Marcus didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't give him a single reason. He stood exactly where he was and let it happen, because he was the professional in this situation, and he knew it. And making that clear meant not giving Sonder 1 inch of justification. His arms went behind his back. The metal was cold. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the cemetery. A woman sobbed openly. A chair scraped concrete as someone stood. Velma said his name. Marcus, in a voice that broke in the middle of it. He didn't look back at the casket. He couldn't. If he looked back at his mother's casket right now, something inside him would come apart. And he could not afford that. Not here. Not in front of this man. His rose was on the grass. Saunders' hand gripped his arm and walked him forward. And Marcus Chester, senior FBI special agent, 26 years of service, decorated and distinguished, was walked away from his mother's grave in handcuffs, while Reverend Winter watched with his Bible pressed to his chest, and 60 mourners bore witness to every step. The drive to the precinct took 11 minutes. Marcus counted them. Not because he was panicking. He wasn't. He counted because it gave his mind something clean to hold on to, while the rest of him processed what had just happened. 11 minutes, 4 traffic lights, 2 turns, 1 parking lot. Sonder didn't speak during the drive. Neither did Marcus. The precinct was a squat brick building on Hargrove's main street, sandwiched between a hardware store and a nail salon. A small-town police station that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet the moment the door opened. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A wall-mounted fan pushed warm air from one side of the room to the other without cooling anything. Sonder walked Marcus through the front door with one hand gripping his arm, the cuffs still on, Marcus's hands locked behind his back, his arms pulled at an angle that made his shoulders ache with every step. He had been in them since the cemetery. Nobody had offered to remove them. Nobody seemed to think they needed to. The desk sergeant looked up. His name tag read Harnell. He was older, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed down his nose, the kind of man who had seen enough years in this building to recognize when something didn't sit right. His eyes moved from Sonder to Marcus, to the suit, to the way Marcus was standing, shoulders back, chin level, refusing to let the cuffs make him small, even though his arms were wrenched behind him, and there wasn't a thing he could do about it. He didn't say anything yet, but his eyes said something. Sonder dropped the property bag on the counter. Marcus's wallet, his phone, his keys, everything emptied from his pockets by Saunders' hands, because Marcus couldn't reach any of it himself. Couldn't reach anything. His hands were useless behind his back, the metal biting into his wrists every time he shifted his weight. Processing a detainee. Warrant match, armed robbery out of Fulton County. Harnell picked up the property bag, looked at the credentials wallet through the clear plastic, looked at Marcus, hands cuffed behind him, standing straight despite it, jaw set. Looked back at Sonder. "Pull up the warrant photo," he said. Sonder moved to the nearest computer terminal. 4 minutes. That was all it took. The warrant photo for Marcus D. Williams loaded on the screen, and Harnell leaned forward on his elbows and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Marcus D. Williams was 44 years old, 5 feet 10 inches tall. He had a tattoo on his neck, a thick, dark design that ran from behind his left ear to his collarbone. His booking photo showed a man who shared a first name and a skin tone with the man currently standing in handcuffs in this lobby. That was where the similarities ended. Harnell straightened up. He pulled Sonder to the side. Not far enough. Marcus could hear every word. He stood where Sonder had left him, hands still locked behind his back, arms aching, with nowhere to put any of it except inside himself. Benjamin. This isn't the guy. Similar description. I used my judgment. His ID says Chester. His badge. Badges can be forged. IDs can be forged. I'm not releasing a potential armed robbery suspect because he's got a good wallet. Harnell looked at Sonder for a moment. Something moved across his face. Not quite disbelief. Not quite disgust. Something in between. The look of a man who knew better and also knew when arguing would cost him more than it was worth. Process him, Sonder said. We'll sort it out. They walked Marcus to the holding room without removing the cuffs. It was small. A metal table, 2 chairs, a single window with frosted glass that let in light, but no view. The door closed behind him with a heavy click. Nobody came to remove the cuffs. He was simply left there, arms still locked behind his back, shoulders burning, wrists raw where the metal had been sitting for the better part of an hour. Marcus stood for a moment. Then he moved to the chair and sat down carefully, leaning forward slightly to take the pressure off his arms. It was the only position that gave him any relief. He couldn't lean back, couldn't rest, couldn't do anything with his hands except feel the cuffs reminding him, every few seconds, exactly where he was and exactly how he'd gotten here. He looked up at the wall. He did not pace. He did not call out. He did not perform his frustration for anyone. He sat with it the way he had learned to sit with hard things, directly, without flinching, without looking away. He thought about the rose on the grass. He thought about Reverend Winter's voice cutting off mid-psalm. He thought about Velma's hand on his arm, the last thing he had felt before the cuffs went on, and his hands were taken from him. A mile away, his mother's burial was continuing without him. The Reverend would finish the psalm. The choir would sing. The casket would be lowered. Velma would stand at the edge of the grave and hold herself together by sheer force of will, because that was what Velma did. The neighbors would lay flowers. Someone would say something beautiful about Ruth Chester, and it would be true. Every word of it. And her son would not be there. He breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, leaning forward in that chair, arms pinned behind him, shoulders on fire. The same breathing technique he used before walking into dangerous situations. The same one he had used for 26 years. Outside the holding room, he could hear the precinct's ordinary sounds. A phone ringing, a keyboard clicking, Saunders' voice somewhere down the hall, steady and unbothered, as if nothing of consequence had happened this morning, as if it were just another Tuesday. Marcus looked at the frosted window. The light coming through it was the same Georgia light that was falling, right now, on his mother's grave. He sat forward in the chair, cuffs still on, arms still behind him, and he waited. The phone on Saunders' desk rang at 11:47 a.m. He almost didn't answer it. He was leaning back in his chair, coffee in hand, telling Harnell something about the weekend. Relaxed. Comfortable. The kind of comfortable that comes from a man who believes he has done exactly what he intended to do and paid no price for it. He picked up on the third ring. Officer Sonder, Hargrove PD. The voice on the other end was a woman's. Calm. Measured. The kind of calm that isn't warm. The kind that has been deliberately constructed, the way a wall is constructed, to be impenetrable. Officer Sonder, my name is Diane Ashworth. I am the special agent in charge of the FBI's Atlanta field office. Saunders' chair stopped leaning. "You are currently holding Senior Special Agent Marcus Chester, badge number 4471, Counterterrorism Division, 26 years of federal service." A pause, short, surgical. "I need you to release him, right now, before you make the second worst decision of your career." The coffee cup came down on the desk. Saunders' eyes moved, slowly, like a man who doesn't want to look but can't stop himself, to the property tray on the counter, the clear plastic bag, the wallet inside it. He had looked at it for 3 seconds at the cemetery and decided he didn't need to look longer. He was looking at it now. The gold badge caught the fluorescent light. He stood up, crossed to the tray, picked up the bag with one hand, and turned it over. The credentials card was right there. Had been right there the entire time. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Senior Special Agent. Marcus J. Chester. The photograph matched the man in the holding room down to the line of his jaw. Saunders' face did something complicated. We'll get him processed out," he said into the phone. "You'll do it now," Diane said. "And Officer Saunders, this call has been logged." The line went dead. The holding room door opened 2 minutes later. Saunders stood in the doorway. Marcus was still in the chair, still leaning forward, arms still pinned behind him, cuffs still on. He hadn't moved, hadn't shifted, hadn't given this room 1 inch of himself beyond what was taken. He looked up when the door opened. His expression didn't change. Saunders crossed the room. His hands weren't quite steady as he reached for the cuffs. The key scraped once before it caught. The metal released. Marcus brought his arms forward slowly. He straightened in the chair, rolling his shoulders once. A small, controlled motion. He looked at his wrists. The marks were deep red, a clear outline of where the cuffs had sat for the better part of 2 hours. He looked at them the way a man looks at evidence. Calm, noting, filing it away. He stood. He was taller than Saunders. He had always been taller than Saunders, and somehow it felt more significant now than it had at the cemetery. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his collar. He did it slowly, and he did it completely, as if Saunders weren't standing 3 feet away, as if the room weren't what it was. Then he walked to the property counter. Harnell slid the bag across without a word. Marcus opened it and removed each item, wallet, phone, keys, placing them back in their correct pockets with deliberate care. He opened the wallet, looked at the badge, closed it. He turned toward the exit, and then he stopped. His eyes had found Saunders' desk. The warrant sheet was still there, face up, where Saunders had left it. Marcus D. Williams, Fulton County, armed robbery. Marcus looked at it for a long moment. He read the physical description. He looked at the timestamp at the top of the document, the time it had been printed. 6:47 a.m. The funeral had started at 10. Someone had pulled this warrant, selected it, and put it in Saunders' hands 3 hours before the service began. Not a coincidence, not a mistake. A decision made in the early morning hours by someone who knew his name, knew his face, knew exactly where he would be standing and when. Marcus looked at Saunders. Saunders looked back at him. Neither man spoke. There was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already saying louder. "I need to go bury my mother," Marcus said. He walked out through the front door into the afternoon sun. The Georgia heat hit him full in the face, bright and indifferent and enormous. He stood on the precinct steps for just a moment, alone, blinking in the light. Ruth was already in the ground. He had missed it, all of it. The last psalm, the final prayer, the moment the casket went down. He had been sitting in a metal chair with his arms behind his back while his mother was buried a mile away, and there was no going back to that morning and doing it differently. He sat down on the precinct steps. He took out his phone, returned to him 2 minutes ago in a plastic bag, and called the only number he had for Reverend Winter. The Reverend picked up on the first ring. "I'm outside the precinct," Marcus said. "I'm already on my way," Winter said. "I have your car." He hung up. He sat on the steps with his elbows on his knees and looked at the empty street in front of him. His wrists still carried the red marks from the cuffs. He didn't cover them, didn't rub them. Just let them be what they were. 15 minutes later, Reverend Winter pulled up in Marcus's rental car. He had quietly lifted the keys from the property bag at the cemetery before anyone thought to stop him, calm and deliberate even in the middle of everything. He parked, stepped out, and stood in front of Marcus on those steps. He didn't offer a sermon, didn't reach for scripture. He just looked at Marcus, at the marks on his wrists, at the suit that had been pressed and perfect that morning, and said, "We finished the service. Every word. She went home right, Marcus." Something moved through Marcus's chest. He nodded once and stood up. "The congregation stayed," Winter continued, handing him the keys. "Every single person. Nobody left until it was done." Marcus closed his hand around the keys and held them tight for a moment. They drove to the cemetery in silence. Ruth's grave was fresh and covered in white flowers. The mourners had stayed and finished what he couldn't. Someone had picked up his rose from the grass and laid it on top of the others, right at the center. He stood at the edge of the grave for a long time without speaking. Then he got back in the car. Ruth's kitchen smelled like her. That was the first thing Marcus noticed when he walked in that evening. Cornbread and lavender, and something underneath both of those things that he couldn't name, but had known his entire life. The smell of her house, the smell of home. It hit him in the chest the moment he crossed the threshold, and he stood in the doorway for a second longer than necessary, just breathing it in. The neighbors had been and gone. They had left food covering every surface. Foil-wrapped dishes stacked on the counter, casserole pans on the stove, a chocolate cake on the kitchen table with a handwritten note tucked under the edge. Ruth had fed half this town at one point or another. Now the town was feeding her son, and the kindness of it was almost harder to take than the grief. Velma was at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. She had changed out of her funeral dress. She looked smaller without it somehow. Smaller and older, and tired in a way that went deeper than one day. Marcus sat across from her. Neither of them spoke for a while. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, the Georgia evening was settling in, the light going gold and then amber through the window above the sink. She was worried, Velma said finally. She didn't look up from her mug. The last few weeks. More than she let on to most people. Marcus waited. "You know how your mother was. She didn't scare easy." Velma looked up now. "But she was scared, Marcus. She'd seen something, found out something about what the city was doing down on the south side. Families getting notices on their doors. Code violations that didn't exist. People being told their homes weren't safe to live in, being pushed out, and nobody telling them where to go or what to do next." She shook her head slowly. She was collecting their stories, writing it all down. She sent letters to the city council. 3 of them, I know of. Never heard a word back. Marcus was very still. Why didn't she tell me? Velma looked at him with something gentle and sad in her eyes. Because you would have come home. And she didn't want you dropping everything for her. You know how she was about that. He did know. He knew exactly how she was about that. His phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. He almost let it go. And then something made him pick it up. The voice on the other end was young, male, tight with nerves. "Mr. Chester." A pause. "This is... I'd rather not say my name, but I was there today. At the cemetery, Marcus recognized the cadence before he recognized the voice. Careful, guilty, trying to do the right thing from behind a wall of fear. Greaves. "I'm listening," Marcus said. The call Saunder got, it didn't come from dispatch. It wasn't a routine complaint. Somebody called his personal cell directly. Another pause, longer this time. The number was from Hargrove City Hall. "I saw it on his phone when he took the call. He didn't know I was looking." The line went quiet for a moment. "That's all I can say," Greaves said. And then he was gone. Marcus set the phone down on the table. He looked at Velma. She was watching him with the careful eyes of a woman who has learned that phone calls like that, one never bring good news, and sometimes bring necessary news, and that the difference matters. He opened his laptop. The Hargrove Gazette's online archive went back 11 years. Marcus worked through it methodically, the way he worked through everything, starting broad and narrowing down, following threads rather than assumptions. It took him 40 minutes to find the first arrest, then the second. By the time he found the seventh, the pattern was so clear it was almost elegant in its ugliness. 7 black men, 4 years, all of them connected to community organizing on Hargrove's South Side, all arrested at maximum public moments: a town hall, a community meeting, a church fundraiser, a neighborhood association vote, charges that were thin at best and dropped at worst. But the arrests themselves had done their job. Silenced, humiliated, removed from the room at the exact moment their presence mattered most. Marcus sat back in his chair and looked at the screen. He thought about the warrant timestamp, 6:47 a.m. He thought about Greaves's voice, tight and guilty, and unable to stay completely silent. He thought about his mother's letters, unanswered in some filing cabinet in a city building where someone had decided she didn't matter enough to respond to. He opened a fresh document. At the top, he typed one line: "What they built, and how we take it apart." His grief was still there. It hadn't gone anywhere. But it had found its shape now. And its shape had edges, and a direction, and a purpose that Ruth Chester herself had already pointed him toward without knowing she was doing it. He started typing. Marcus was up before sunrise. He hadn't slept much. A few hours in Ruth's spare room, on a bed that still had her quilts folded at the foot of it. He lay there in the dark for a long time, listening to the house settle around him, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of Hargrove at night. Quiet, ordinary. A town that looked, from the outside, exactly like what it wanted you to think it was. He was dressed and out the door by 7. He didn't start with documents. He didn't start with databases or records or the careful architecture of a federal case. He started the way his mother would have started. On foot, in the neighborhood, listening. He drove the south side of Hargrove slowly, windows down, taking it in the way you take in something you need to understand completely before you touch it. The south side was old Hargrove, the real Hargrove. Streets lined with oak trees whose roots had buckled the sidewalks over decades. Small houses with front porches, vegetable gardens in side yards, hand-painted mailboxes, a barber shop with a closed sign in the window, and a padlock on the door that looked newer than everything around it. A community garden, or what had been one, now flattened to bare dirt, behind a chain-link fence, with a city notice stapled to it. He parked and got out, and read the notice. Condemned. Hargrove City Code Violation 44B. Unauthorized structure. City of Hargrove Department of Planning. The garden had been there for 20 years. Marcus knew because his mother had helped plant it. He spent the next 2 days moving through the south side the way water moves, finding the low places, the gaps, the spaces where people gathered and talked. He sat on porches. He ate food he was given without arguing about it. He let people tell their stories in their own time and in their own order, because that was the only way to hear the whole truth of something. The stories were the same story told 12 different ways. A notice on the door. A code violation that made no sense. A roof pitch that supposedly didn't meet standards on a house that had stood for 50 years. An electrical issue that 3 independent contractors said didn't exist. City inspectors who came once, wrote their reports, and never came back to verify anything. Families given 30 days, then 15, then told their appeal had been denied before they had even filed it. An elderly couple, the Bramwells, married 51 years, were living in a motel on the edge of town. Their house had been condemned 6 months ago. They were paying $200 a week from their fixed income for a room with a broken heater and a window that didn't close all the way. Marcus sat at their small motel table and listened to Mr. Bramwell describe the day the notice came. How he had read it 3 times because he couldn't believe what it said. How he had called the city and been transferred 4 times, and then disconnected. How his wife had cried that night for the first time in their marriage that he could remember. Marcus wrote it all down. On the second afternoon, he knocked on the door of a neat brick building on Hargrove's Main Street, the office of Councilwoman Petra Hollins. She opened the door herself, looked at him for a moment, and said, "I wondered when you'd come." "Get in here." She was 55, sharp-eyed, and moved through her office like a woman permanently running out of time. She had been trying to audit Chief Pratt's department for 2 years. 2 years of motions filed and blocked, requests submitted and lost, meetings scheduled and canceled. She pulled open a filing cabinet and gestured at it like she was presenting evidence at trial. "Every complaint in there was filed correctly," she said. "Every single one went nowhere. You want to know why?" Marcus already knew why, but he let her say it. Because Pratt owns 3 members of this council outright, and has enough on a 4th to keep him quiet. Because his brother-in-law, Gareth Monroe, stands to make $14 million when this development closes and is apparently willing to share. And because nobody with enough authority has ever walked through that door and sat down in that chair and decided this was worth their time. She looked at him steadily. Until today. Marcus opened his laptop. "Show me everything." She showed him. It took 3 hours. By the end of it, they had mapped the full machinery. The shell company receiving Pratt's consulting fees, the pattern of arrests timed to suppress opposition, the development timeline running beneath all of it, like a current under still water. And then Hollins pulled up the precinct's database access log on her shared screen. She pointed at a single-line entry without saying a word. The timestamp read 6:47 a.m. The login credentials belonged to Chief Zach Pratt. Marcus took out his phone and photographed the screen. The machine had a face now. Marcus called Diane Ashworth at 9 o'clock that night. He was at Ruth's kitchen table, the laptop open. Hollins's files spread across the surface alongside his own notes. 2 days of work laid out in front of him. Names, dates, amounts, timestamps. The shell company. The access log. The 12 families. The 7 arrests. All of it connected, all of it pointing in the same direction, all of it building toward something that was bigger than one bad cop at a cemetery. Diane picked up on the second ring. He talked for 30 minutes without stopping. He laid it out the way he always laid things out, chronologically, cleanly, without editorializing. The warrant pulled at 6:47 a.m., Pratt's login credentials on the access log. The shell company receiving consulting fees. Monroe's $14 million commission. The 12 families. The pattern of 7 arrests. Ruth's letters that were never answered. When he finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "How solid is the access log?" Diane asked. Hollins pulled it from the city's shared municipal server. It's time-stamped and unaltered. Pratt's credentials are on it. And the shell company? Registered in Delaware. Monroe's wife's maiden name. Pratt has been receiving payments every quarter for 3 years. Another pause. He could hear Diane thinking. The specific quality of her silence when she was building something in her head. Marcus. Her voice shifted slightly. Still composed, but with something careful underneath it now. You know what I have to say. I'm recused, he said. I know. You are a victim and a witness in this case. Anything you touch directly becomes complicated. I need you to hand me what you have and step back from the investigative side. A beat. I will take it from here. But I need you to trust that and mean it. I trust it, Marcus said. And he did. He had worked under Diane Ashworth for 11 years. He had never once seen her leave something unfinished. Get some sleep, she said. And Marcus, this was good work. He closed the laptop. He sat in the kitchen for a while, in the quiet that his mother had lived in every evening of her life in this house. The clock on the wall ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, Hargrove was dark and still. The next morning, Marcus called Denver Vander. Vander had been a family friend for 30 years, had gone to church with Ruth, had been at every Chester graduation and holiday dinner Marcus could remember. He was 52 now, silver at his temples, with the calm and unhurried manner of a man who had spent 3 decades watching the legal system move slowly, and had made his peace with it without ever making his peace with injustice. He listened to Marcus without interruption. When Marcus finished, Vander said simply, I've been watching what they've been doing to the South Side for 2 years. I've been waiting for the right moment. A pause. This is the right moment. Vander filed the civil complaint that afternoon. It named Sonder and Pratt directly. Unlawful arrest, excessive force, civil rights violations under federal statute. It was precise, and it was public, and it was designed to do one specific thing: force Hargrove PD onto the record. Make them respond. Make them defend in writing what they had done at that cemetery. Marcus knew it would make noise. That was the point. The noise took less than 24 hours to reach the right ears. Pratt moved fast. He got on the phone with a Georgia state representative named Burwell, a man who owed Pratt 3 favors and had been waiting nervously for the bill to come due. Burwell called the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility and filed a formal complaint alleging that a federal agent was conducting an unauthorized, politically motivated investigation of a local law enforcement agency. The complaint landed on Diane's desk by the following morning. She called Marcus immediately. Her voice was controlled but tight in a way he recognized. The tightness of a woman managing something that was moving faster than she wanted it to. They've filed an OPR complaint against you. Burwell's name is on it, but Pratt's fingerprints are all over it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Can they slow us down? They can try to taint your evidence if the review goes badly. If OPR decides you've been conducting unauthorized investigative activity, anything you've gathered becomes a problem in any subsequent proceeding. A pause. We have 72 hours before this gets complicated. Marcus set the phone down on Ruth's kitchen table. He looked at her calendar on the wall, still open to the month she died, still marked with her careful handwriting. A dentist appointment. A church committee meeting. A note that said, call Marcus on a Tuesday 3 weeks ago. He hadn't called back in time. He turned the calendar page forward. A new month. Empty squares waiting to be filled. He picked the phone back up and called Vander. The call from Vander came at 8 in the morning. Marcus was in Ruth's kitchen, standing at the stove, making the same coffee she had made every morning of her life. 2 scoops, a pinch of cinnamon, the way she had taught him when he was 12 years old and thought coffee was a grown-up thing worth learning. He had the mug halfway to his mouth when his phone buzzed on the counter. He set the mug down. "They got to Greaves," Vander said. No preamble, no easing into it. Marcus was quiet. He signed a statement this morning. Says Saunders' call was routine dispatch. Says the arrest was standard procedure following a legitimate warrant match. Vander paused. He's recanted everything. The anonymous tip, the city hall number, all of it. Gone. Marcus walked to the kitchen window and looked out at Ruth's backyard. Her bird feeder was still full. She had filled it the week before she died, and the birds were still coming, still finding what she had left for them without knowing she was gone. "He's scared," Marcus said. "He's scared," Vander agreed. "Pratt got to him. Probably threatened his job, his pension, maybe more than that. Greaves is 29 years old with a young family. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying I understand the arithmetic he did." Marcus understood it too. That was the hardest part. Greaves wasn't a villain. He was a young man standing at the edge of something that could swallow him whole. And he had stepped back. Marcus had seen it before. Good people making bad choices not out of malice, but out of fear, and the system counting on exactly that calculation every single time. It didn't make it hurt less. Without Greaves, the anonymous tip disappeared from the record. The City Hall number, the direct line to Pratt's assistant that Greaves had seen on Saunders' phone, was now unverifiable by eyewitness testimony. Marcus had the database access log, the shell company, the family testimonies, but the chain connecting Pratt directly to the arrest had a gap in it now. A gap that a good defense attorney would drive a truck through. He needed to find another way across. He spent the rest of the morning going back to the beginning. Not forward, back. When every road ahead is blocked, you go back to where the road started and look for the turn you missed. It was a principle he had applied to counterterrorism cases for 26 years, and it had never failed him yet. He pulled up everything he had on the arrest itself. The warrant, the timestamp, the precinct records. He went through it line by line, the way he had been trained to go through things, slowly, without assumption, letting the evidence tell him what it knew rather than telling it what he wanted to hear. And then he remembered the watch. It was a small detail, the kind of thing that lives at the edge of your memory and doesn't announce itself. It just waits until you're quiet enough to notice it. At the cemetery, when Saunders had been walking Marcus to the cruiser, Greaves had been standing at the gate. He had been wearing his department-issued smartwatch on his left wrist, standard issue for Hargrove PD. The department had rolled them out 8 months ago, part of a county wellness initiative. Marcus had noted it the way he noted everything, automatically, without knowing yet why it would matter. He called Vander back. Greaves was wearing his department smartwatch at the cemetery, Marcus said. Those watches sync automatically with the precinct server. Every hour, sometimes more. If it synced that morning, it logged everything on his wrist, heart rate, location, and any incoming data from the precinct network. A pause on Vander's end, then, including call notifications that passed through the department system. If Saunders' incoming call pinged the precinct network even for a second, if it routed through any department infrastructure, it would be in that sync log. With a timestamp, Vander was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when he was already drafting something in his head. "I'll subpoena the sync log today," he said. It took until early evening. Vander called Marcus at 6:47. The irony of the time was not lost on either of them, and read him the entry directly from the subpoenaed record. An incoming call to Saunders' personal cell phone. Time-stamped 7:54 a.m. The number it had pinged from was registered to a direct administrative line at Hargrove City Hall. Not the main number. Not the general office. a direct extension assigned to the personal assistant of Chief Zach Pratt. 6 minutes before the funeral started. Marcus wrote the number down in Ruth's notepad, the small spiral one she kept beside the kitchen phone for grocery lists and important numbers, and things she didn't want to forget. He pressed the pen down harder than he needed to. "That's your chain," Vander said quietly. Marcus looked at the number on the page. Then he looked at his mother's handwriting on the lines above it. A grocery list in her careful, familiar script. Butter, cornmeal, peaches. "Yeah," Marcus said. "That's my chain." The city council chamber was standing room only by 6:30. Marcus got there early and sat in the back for a while, just watching the room fill up. He wasn't there as an FBI agent tonight. He wasn't there as anything official. He was there as a citizen of Hargrove, Georgia, and as the son of Ruth Chester, and he wanted to see the room before he stood up in it. People came in steady streams. South Side families he had visited over the past 2 days, church members who had been at his mother's funeral, neighbors who had received condemnation notices and had nowhere else to bring their anger. They filled the rows of chairs and then the spaces along the walls. They were quiet, mostly. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. The quiet of people who have been patient for a long time and have come tonight because patience only stretches so far. Councilwoman Hollins was already at the council table when Marcus arrived, her reading glasses on, papers stacked neatly in front of her. She caught his eye across the room and gave him a single, small nod. She had been working toward this moment for 2 years. She was ready. Chief Pratt came in at 6:45 and took a seat in the back row. He didn't sit with the council. He sat with his arms crossed and his face arranged into an expression of careful, practiced boredom. The face of a man performing the idea that none of this concerned him. But his eyes moved constantly, taking inventory, counting heads, calculating. Marcus watched him do it. The session was called to order at 7. 3 items on the agenda. The third item was the one that mattered. A motion to authorize an independent audit of the Hargrove Police Department's arrest records for the past 5 years. Hollins had placed it there herself 3 days ago, the morning after Marcus had laid everything out on her office table. The first 2 items took 20 minutes. Nobody in the room was paying attention to them. When Hollins called item 3, the room shifted. People sat forward. The quiet got quieter. "We have a citizen who has requested time to address the council," Hollins said. "I'm granting 5 minutes, which I will extend at my discretion." She looked up. "Mr. Chester." Marcus stood and walked to the front of the room. He did not bring notes. He had the facts in his head, organized and ordered, the way he carried everything that mattered. He stood at the podium and looked at the council members first, then at the room, then back at the council. He spoke for 8 minutes. He did not raise his voice once. He didn't need to. The facts raised themselves. He laid out the pattern of 7 arrests, dates, names, circumstances, charges filed, and then quietly dropped. He named the Hargrove South Corridor Development Project and described what it would displace. 400 families, a community that had existed on the South Side for generations. He named the shell company and described its connection to Chief Pratt. He described the warrant pulled at 6:47 a.m. from Pratt's login credentials. He read out the timestamp from Greaves's smartwatch sync log. 7:54 a.m., 6 minutes before the funeral. An incoming call from Pratt's assistant's direct line to Saunders' personal cell. He said his mother's name once. Just once. At the very end. Ruth Chester spent the last months of her life collecting the stories of the families this city was pushing out. She wrote 3 letters to this council. Not one of them was answered. He paused for exactly 1 second. She deserved better than that. So did every family on that south side. And this council has the opportunity tonight to be the first body in this city to actually do something about it. He stepped back from the podium and returned to his seat. The room was absolutely still for a moment. Then someone started clapping, slowly at first, then others joined. Then it was the whole room, rising to its feet in sections like a wave moving from back to front. Pratt didn't clap. He sat with his arms still crossed, his jaw tight, his eyes on Marcus with an expression that had finally dropped its performance of boredom and replaced it with something cold and direct and unambiguous. Marcus looked back at him without blinking. The vote came 20 minutes later after a public comment period that ran long because person after person from the South Side stood up and added their voice to the record. When Hollins finally called it, 4 council members voted yes. 3 voted no. The audit was authorized. The gallery erupted. People embraced in the aisles. A woman near the front covered her face with both hands and shook with relief. Hollins sat at the council table and let the tears come quietly, not bothering to wipe them away. Marcus didn't cheer. He sat in his chair and let himself feel it, just for a moment. Just this one moment. The possibility that the machine had a weakness, after all. Outside on the council building steps, the night air was warm and thick with Georgia summer. Velma was waiting, exactly where she said she would be, her small frame steady and still in the dark. She reached out and took his hand. She held it without saying a single word. For once, that was enough. The call from Hollins came at 9 in the morning. Marcus was at Ruth's kitchen table, coffee going cold beside him, working through Vander's latest filing updates on his laptop. 2 days had passed since the council vote. He had slept better those 2 nights than he had since arriving in Hargrove. Not well, but better. The audit authorization had felt like solid ground under his feet for the first time since the cemetery. He picked up on the second ring. Hollins didn't say hello. Her voice was stripped of everything that had been in it 2 nights ago. The triumph, the relief, the 20 years of fight finally finding its footing. What was left sounded hollow, tired in a way that went deeper than one bad morning. "Reeves flipped," she said. Marcus set down his coffee. Councilwoman Dana Reeves had been one of their 4 yes votes. 53 years old, South Side District Representative, had voted for the audit without hesitation 2 nights ago. Marcus had watched her do it, had seen the steadiness in her face when she said yes. "When?" he asked. "This morning. She called me at 8. Said she had concerns about the procedural basis for the audit. Said she needed more time to review the motion language." Hollins's voice was flat. "She used the exact same words Pratt's attorney used in the motion he filed last year to block my previous audit request. Word for word, Marcus. She was reading from something." Marcus stood up from the table. "Who got to her?" "State Representative Burwell. He called her last night. I don't know what he said, and I don't know what he offered, but whatever it was enough." A pause. "With Reeves flipped, we're tied. 3-3. The audit is suspended pending a full council review, which Pratt's allies will drag out for 6 months minimum." Marcus stood at the kitchen window. Ruth's bird feeder. Still full. Still busy with small wings coming and going, taking what she had left, not knowing anything had changed. "I'm sorry," Hollins said, and she meant it. He could hear the weight of it. 2 years of work stalling out again on the same machinery that had blocked her every time before. "Don't be sorry yet," Marcus said. "We're not done." He believed it when he said it. By afternoon, he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. Vander called at 2. His voice had the careful, measured quality it got when he was delivering news he didn't want to deliver, but wouldn't soften past the point of honesty. "There's a story running on the Georgia Courier website. It went up an hour ago. Marcus pulled it up on his laptop before Vander finished the sentence. The headline read, FBI agent uses mother's death to wage political war on small-town police department. He read it. All of it. It took 4 minutes, and by the end of it, he understood exactly what had been done, and exactly how well it had been done. The story was full of distortions. His recusal framed as a cover story. His evidence gathering described as a personal vendetta. Quotes from unnamed sources inside Hargrove PD painting him as an agent who had gone rogue and was using federal resources to settle a personal score. His name was in it. His badge number. His division. All of it public now. His phone buzzed while he was still reading. Diane. "You've seen it," she said. "Just finished it. The director's office has received 4 calls in the last hour. 2 from state representatives, 1 from a Georgia senator's aide, 1 from a conservative media outlet requesting comment." Her voice was tight. "The OPR complaint has been reactivated. Marcus, if the review goes badly, your evidence becomes tainted. Anything you've touched." "I know," he said. "I need you to sit tight. Don't talk to anyone. Don't file anything. Don't—" "Diane." His voice was quiet. "I know." He hung up. He called Vander. "There's more," Vander said, before Marcus could speak. The careful voice again. The voice that didn't soften things past honesty. "Greaves resigned from the department this morning. Effective immediately. He's left Hargrove. His wife's family is in Tennessee. I think that's where he's gone." Marcus didn't respond right away. Greaves was gone. The sync log was still evidence, but its context, the eyewitness who had seen the number on Saunders' phone, who could stand in a courtroom and say, "I watched it happen," was on a highway to Tennessee with his young family and his guilt and his fear. Marcus sat down on Ruth's kitchen floor. Not a chair. The floor. He just went down, back against the cabinet, knees up, and sat there in his mother's kitchen while the evening light moved slowly across the linoleum. Everything he had built was cracking. The audit gone. His evidence under threat. The only witness disappeared. His name in a headline designed to make him the story instead of the truth. He sat there for a long time. Then his hand found the edge of the counter above him, and he pulled himself up. He walked to the doorway of Ruth's bedroom and stood there looking in at the room she had lived in for 40 years. Her Sunday hat on the hook, her Bible on the nightstand, its spine soft with decades of use, her handwriting cramped and careful in the margins. He crossed the room and picked up the Bible. He wasn't looking for scripture. He was just holding something she had held, thousands of times, in hard moments and ordinary ones, in grief and in gratitude. He held it the way you hold something that still carries a person's warmth, even after they're gone. The back cover fell open in his hand, taped to the inside, neat, deliberate, the way Ruth Chester did everything, was a USB drive. Marcus stared at it. He reached out slowly and peeled it free from the cover. He held it under the bedside lamp. A small, ordinary thing. The kind you could buy at any drugstore. The kind his mother had apparently decided was the right place to keep whatever she had been keeping. He closed his hand around it and stood in the quiet of her room for a moment. Then he carried it to the kitchen table. The USB drive was small in his hand. Marcus sat at Ruth's kitchen table and turned it over once before plugging it into his laptop. The house was completely quiet around him. No neighbors tonight. No Velma. No Reverend Winter. Just the clock on the wall and the refrigerator hum and the Georgia night pressing dark and close against the windows. The drive loaded. One folder. Named in Ruth's way. Simple, direct, no wasted words. She had called it Southside Truth. Marcus opened it. What he found inside stopped him completely. Not because it was surprising. He had known his mother was organized, had known she was thorough, had spent 2 days hearing about the woman she had become in her final months from the people whose stories she had gathered. He knew all of that. But knowing a thing and seeing it are different. Ruth Chester had built a case. Not a federal case. She wasn't an agent, wasn't a lawyer, didn't have subpoena power or database access or the weight of a government institution behind her. What she had was a schoolteacher's precision and a mother's fury and 40 years of knowing exactly how this town worked and who in it could be trusted to tell the truth. 12 families. Every one of them documented, scanned copies of their condemnation notices side by side with photographs she had taken herself of the properties in question. Houses that met every visible standard, standing next to city documents claiming they were uninhabitable. The gap between what the documents said and what the photographs showed was not subtle. It was not a matter of interpretation. It was a lie you could see with your own eyes. She had the bank statements, too, pulled through open records requests she had filed herself, one by one, over 6 months. Monroe's development company had received a $2.1 million city infrastructure contract 2 months before the South Corridor project was publicly announced. Before a single public meeting, before a single community notice. The contract had been approved in a closed session vote with no public record of the discussion. Marcus read every page. Then he found the audio file. It was labeled simply, "Phone Call, City Official." He put his earbuds in and pressed play. His mother's voice came through first, clear and steady. The voice he had known his entire life, the voice that had read him to sleep and called him to dinner and told him the truth about the world even when the truth was hard. "I just want to understand the process for appealing a condemnation notice. These families have a right—" A man's voice cut across hers, impatient, dismissive. The voice of someone who had decided before the call began that this conversation was beneath him. "Mrs. Chester, I'm going to say this one time. The South Side situation is a city planning matter. It is above your pay grade and outside your lane. You need to let this go. These are people's homes. These are city properties under city jurisdiction, and what happens to them is not your concern. File your little letters if it makes you feel better. Nobody's reading them." A pause, brief, pointed. "And if you keep pushing this, the next call you get won't be from me. You understand what I'm saying to you?" Silence on the recording. His mother's silence, dignified and absolute. The silence of a woman who had heard this kind of threat before and refused to let it be the last word. Then the call ended. Marcus sat very still. He pulled out his earbuds and set them on the table. He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he went back to the folder. The last item was an email chain, forwarded to Ruth by a council clerk whose name Marcus recognized, a woman who had been at the funeral, who had stayed until the end. The chain was between Pratt and Gareth Monroe. 8 emails spanning 3 weeks, discussing the development timeline, the displacement schedule, the community opposition that was slowing things down. And then, in the second-to-last email, Pratt had written, "The Chester woman is becoming a problem. Her son is FBI. He's coming down for the funeral next month. We need to handle the Chester situation before he gets here. I have something in mind. Leave it with me." Monroe's response was 4 words. "Do what you need." Marcus read it twice, then a third time. They had known he was coming. They had planned for him. The warrant, Sonder, the cemetery. None of it was a reaction. It was a preparation. A message delivered in the most painful setting they could find, calculated to humiliate him publicly and dare him to respond. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark kitchen for a long time without moving. Then he picked up his phone and dialed Diane Ashworth. It was 2 a.m. She picked up on the first ring. They arrived at 9 the next morning. Marcus heard the cars before he saw them. 2 sets of tires on Ruth's quiet street, deliberate and unhurried. He was already at the kitchen window when the first black SUV with federal plates pulled up against the curb. The second parked directly behind it. Diane Ashworth stepped out first. She was 51, trim, with close-cropped natural hair, and the kind of posture that came not from vanity, but from 20 years of walking into rooms that didn't expect her and refusing to adjust her bearing accordingly. She wore a dark blazer despite the Georgia heat and carried a slim leather folder under one arm. She looked at the house for a moment, at the flower beds Ruth had kept, the porch swing, the wind chime by the door, and something moved briefly across her face before she put it away and crossed the lawn. 2 agents came behind her. Then a woman. Marcus didn't know. Late 40s, severe in the best sense of the word, with sharp eyes that were already reading the neighborhood before she reached the porch steps. Diane knocked twice, and Marcus opened the door. "Marcus!" She looked at him the way she always looked at him, directly, without softening, seeing exactly what was there. The tiredness, the marks still faintly visible on his wrists, the set of his jaw. "You look like you haven't slept." "I slept," he said. "How much?" "Some." She held his gaze for a second, then stepped inside. The other agents followed. The woman came last and extended her hand before Marcus could ask. "Sandy David, U.S. Attorney, Northern District of Georgia." Marcus shook it. "You work fast." "Diane called me at 2:15 this morning," David said, looking around the kitchen with those quick, reading eyes. "I was already aware of the Georgia Development Corridor. I've had a file open on Monroe's operations for 7 months." She set her briefcase on the kitchen table. "I just didn't have the center of it. Show me what you have." Marcus opened the laptop. He walked them through everything at Ruth's kitchen table. The USB drive first, file by file, the 12 families, the condemnation photographs, the bank statements showing Monroe's $2.1 million contract, the audio recording. When his mother's voice came through the laptop speaker, steady and clear, asking her reasonable question, being told to stay in her lane, Diane went very still. She didn't look at Marcus. She looked at the table. Then the email chain. David leaned forward when he reached Pratt's email. "The Chester woman is becoming a problem," and read it twice without speaking. Then she sat back and looked at Diane. "That's conspiracy," she said. Not a question. A conclusion. "There's more," Marcus said. He pulled up the sync log, the database access timestamp, the shell company documentation, the pattern of 7 arrests with dates and names and dropped charges. David read everything. She asked 3 questions, precise, technical questions about chain of custody and document provenance. And Marcus answered all 3. When she was satisfied, she closed her folder and folded her hands on top of it. "Mr. Chester, what your mother built, combined with what you've gathered, gives me federal charges on Pratt and Monroe. Conspiracy to deprive citizens of civil rights, wire fraud, obstruction of justice." She looked at him steadily. "This is a federal case now." Marcus nodded once. "Which means," Diane said quietly, "that you're out." He had known it was coming. He had known it since the night he called her at 2 a.m. He was a victim, a witness. The moment this became a federal prosecution, his direct involvement became a liability rather than an asset, and he was too good an agent to pretend otherwise. "I know," he said. Diane stood. She gathered her folder and looked at him across the table. Across Ruth's table, in Ruth's kitchen, in the house that smelled like cornbread and lavender, and everything she had left behind. "Your mother built this case," Diane said. "We're just going to file it." She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then she squeezed his shoulder once, brief, firm, and turned toward the door. Marcus watched them go from the kitchen window. Both SUVs pulling away from the curb, federal plates catching the morning light, carrying everything Ruth had gathered, and everything he had built out of Hargrove, and toward whatever came next. The street went quiet again. He turned to the sink. He washed the coffee mugs from the morning. Ruth's mugs, Ruth's dish soap, Ruth's yellow dish rack that had stood beside that sink for 15 years. He washed each one carefully and set them to dry. Then he sat back down at her table and waited. The next 72 hours were the hardest kind of hard. Not the hard of action. Marcus knew how to do that kind of hard. Not the hard of grief, which he had been carrying since the moment he got the call about Ruth and had learned to carry without putting down. This was the hard of stillness, of being the person who knew everything and could do nothing, of sitting in his mother's kitchen while the case he had built moved through channels he was no longer allowed to touch. He read. He cooked badly. He fixed the loose hinge on Ruth's back door that had been loose for 2 years and that he had promised, on 4 separate phone calls, that he would get to next time he visited. He got to it now. He painted the porch step that had been weathering since last summer. He did the things a son does when he finally comes home, and the person he came home to isn't there anymore. He waited. Diane called him with updates when she could. Short calls, carefully worded, telling him what he needed to know without telling him more than was appropriate. He listened without asking questions she couldn't answer, which was its own kind of discipline. On the first day, the City Hall administrative number was traced formally through federal subpoena. It belonged to a direct line assigned to Pratt's personal assistant, a woman named Beverly Olbrich, who had worked for Pratt for 9 years. Federal agents sat across from Beverly Olbrich in a conference room for 3 hours. Diane called Marcus at 6 that evening. She cooperated, Diane said simply. Marcus closed his eyes for a second. Beverly Olbrich had made the call to Sonder at Pratt's direct instruction. She had watched Pratt pull the warrant from the database himself, print it, and hand it to Sonder the morning of the funeral. She had heard Pratt say, in those exact words, that it needed to happen publicly, that the humiliation was the point. She had been carrying it for 2 weeks, and when federal agents put the immunity agreement on the table in front of her, she had started talking before the ink was dry. The second day was Greaves. Diane had located him in Tennessee. Marcus had been right about that. She made the call herself, without Marcus, keeping the separation clean and unassailable. She laid out the federal witness protection offer plainly and without pressure. Greaves asked for 2 hours to talk to his wife. He called back in 40 minutes. His full statement took 4 hours to record. Everything he had seen, everything he had heard, everything he had stayed silent about and resigned over rather than face. The call he had watched Pratt make to Sonder the week before the funeral. Yes, a week before, planning it out, where Pratt had described what he wanted done and how he wanted it to look. Greaves had known. He had known before the cemetery, and he had stood at that gate and done nothing, and he would have to live with that. And the sound of him saying so, Diane told Marcus later, was not the sound of a man making a legal calculation. It was the sound of a man confessing. On the second day, Vander filed the expanded federal civil rights lawsuit. 12 plaintiffs, Ruth's archive as the evidentiary anchor. Every family from the South Side who had received a fraudulent condemnation notice named and documented and represented. Vander sent Marcus a copy of the filing. Marcus read every page. He recognized the names now. The Bramwells at the motel, the barbershop owner, the woman who had stood up at the council session and described watching her mother's garden get bulldozed. Ruth had known all of them, had sat in their homes and written down their stories, and taped a USB drive to the back of her Bible so that someone would find it when she was gone. On the third day, Diane called in the morning. "The OPR complaint," she said. "The director reviewed the full evidentiary record last night. The complaint has been withdrawn completely. No finding, no mark on your record." Marcus was sitting on Ruth's porch step, the one he had painted 2 days ago, dry now, solid under him. The Georgia morning was already warm, the oak trees casting long shadows across the yard. "Pratt's Shell Company accounts were frozen this morning," Diane continued. "Monroe's development financing is under federal review. The South Corridor project is effectively dead." Marcus looked at Ruth's flower beds. She had planted marigolds along the front edge, orange and yellow, bright as anything, completely indifferent to everything that had happened in the world since she planted them. "Tomorrow morning," Diane said. "Be home." She hung up. Marcus sat on the porch step in the warm morning and looked at his mother's marigolds for a long time. Then he went inside and made her coffee. 2 scoops, a pinch of cinnamon. He drank it slowly, standing at the kitchen window, watching the birds at her feeder come and go in the early light. Thursday morning came in quiet. Marcus was on the porch before sunrise, coffee in hand, watching Hargrove wake up the way it always had. Slowly, the way small towns do, the light coming up gradual and golden over the rooftops, the first birds finding their voices before anything else did. Ruth had sat on this porch every morning of her life in this house. He understood now why she had done it. There was something about the stillness of early morning that told the truth about a place before the day had a chance to arrange itself into something more presentable. He had barely touched the coffee when his phone buzzed. Diane. One word in the text. Now. He set the mug on the porch railing and stood up. He didn't go anywhere. He wasn't supposed to. He was recused, a witness, a man who had handed the wheel to someone else and had to trust that the road was what he thought it was. He went inside and sat at Ruth's kitchen table and turned on the small television she kept on the counter, the one she watched the morning news on while she drank her coffee and got ready for whatever the day needed from her. The local Hargrove news channel was running a traffic report. Then the anchor's earpiece apparently delivered something, because she stopped mid-sentence and looked directly into the camera with the particular expression of someone receiving information they weren't expecting this early in the morning. "We're getting reports of federal law enforcement activity at the Hargrove Police Department headquarters and Hargrove City Hall. We're sending a crew now." Marcus watched the screen. He kept his hands flat on the table. The footage came in 12 minutes later. Shaky at first, a camera crew arriving fast, then steadying into something clear and unambiguous. Federal vehicles, 6 of them, parked in a line outside Hargrove PD. Agents moving with the particular unhurried efficiency of people who have done exactly this before and know precisely how it goes. Then the City Hall footage. Same picture. Same federal vehicles. Same efficiency. Marcus watched. Chief Zach Pratt was walked out of his own building at 8:14 in the morning. The lobby body camera, his own department's equipment, installed under his own watch, captured every second of it. He was in his uniform. He had apparently arrived early, which Diane had anticipated and accounted for. 2 federal agents flanked him. A third read him his rights in the lobby, while his entire morning staff watched from behind their desks. Pratt's face did not do what Marcus might have expected. It didn't break. It didn't crumble. It went somewhere else entirely. Somewhere flat and unreachable. The face of a man who had spent 30 years making himself untouchable, and was only now, in this lobby, in front of these people, beginning to understand that untouchable had an expiration date. The handcuffs went on. His own staff watched him walk out in his own lobby in front of his own body camera, and not one of them moved a muscle to stop it. Marcus looked at the red marks on his own wrists. faded now, nearly gone, but still there if you knew where to look. He looked at them for a moment. Then he looked back at the screen. Officer Benjamin Sonder was arrested at his home at 8:22 a.m. The news crew didn't have footage of that. It happened in a residential street 3 miles from downtown. But Vander called Marcus while it was happening, having been notified by David's office, and described it in 4 words. They got him, Marcus. The charges were federal. Civil rights violations covering Marcus's arrest, and 4 of the 7 previous targeted arrests. Enough instances, enough documentation, enough of a pattern that no defense attorney in the country could frame it as anything other than what it was. Saunders' union put out a statement by 9 a.m. announcing they would not be providing representation. By 10, Gareth Monroe's development company had been served with a federal asset freeze order. The financing behind the South Corridor project, the $200 million that was going to displace 400 families, that was going to bulldoze the south side of Hargrove for a luxury resort that none of those families would ever set foot in, evaporated. Investors pulled out within hours of the freeze order becoming public. By afternoon, Monroe's office had gone dark. The South Corridor project was dead. Councilwoman Hollins was named interim chair of a federally mandated city oversight commission before noon. She called Marcus from the council building, her voice full of something that sounded like air coming back into a room that had been sealed shut for a long time. "It's over," she said. "Marcus, it's actually over." "Not yet," he said gently. "But it's starting to be." The 12 families from Ruth's archive received formal notification by early afternoon. Their condemnations were under federal review, their cases flagged for immediate reassessment, emergency housing assistance authorized while the review proceeded. The Bramwells, in their motel room with the broken heater and the window that didn't close, received a call from Vander's office at 2 p.m. Marcus thought about Mr. Bramwell reading his condemnation notice 3 times at his kitchen table, because he couldn't believe what it said. He thought about his mother sitting across from that man and writing down every word. He turned off the television. The kitchen went quiet. Outside, through the window, Hargrove looked exactly like it had always looked. The same street, the same oak trees, the same ordinary morning light on ordinary front yards. Except something underneath all of it had shifted. Something that had been fixed and immovable for years had come loose and fallen. And the sound of it falling, though nobody outside had heard it, had changed the shape of things permanently. Marcus sat in his mother's kitchen, surrounded by everything she had left behind, and let himself feel it. All of it. The grief and the exhaustion and the long, slow relief of a thing finally finished. He didn't try to separate them or put them in order. He just sat with all of it at once, the way Ruth had always told him to sit with hard things, completely, without looking away, until you knew what they actually were. He picked up his phone and called Velma. She answered on the first ring the way she always did. He didn't say much, neither did she. But she was crying quietly by the end of the call. Not sad crying. Not the crying of the cemetery or the kitchen or the long, terrible days that had followed. A different kind. The kind that comes when something that was broken for a very long time finally gets fixed, and your body doesn't quite know what to do with the relief of it. "Your mama knew," Velma said, the same thing she had said on the precinct steps. "She always knew." "Yes, she did," Marcus said. He hung up and sat in the quiet house as the afternoon light moved slowly across the kitchen floor. The same light his mother had watched move across that same floor, every day, for 40 years. 2 weeks passed. They passed the way time passes after something enormous. Slowly at first, then all at once. Marcus stayed in Hargrove longer than he had planned, longer than he had stayed in years. He fixed things around the house. He cooked badly and improved gradually. He sat on the porch in the early mornings with his coffee and watched the street the way Ruth had watched it. And slowly, in increments too small to measure, something that had been wound very tight inside him began to loosen. Vander called with updates. The federal proceedings were moving. Pratt and Sonder had both been formally indicted. Monroe's assets remained frozen pending a full financial investigation. Beverly Ulbricht's cooperation agreement was holding. Greaves's testimony had been submitted and accepted into the federal record. The 12 families were being processed through the Emergency Housing Assistance Program. The Bramwells had left the motel and were staying with family while their case was reviewed, and a federal assessor had already visited their property and found, in writing, exactly what 3 independent contractors had found before him. Nothing wrong, nothing that justified a condemnation notice. Nothing except a city's deliberate decision to push them out for someone else's profit. The South Side was still the South Side. It would take time, real time, the kind that couldn't be rushed, before everything that had been broken there was fixed. Marcus knew that. He had spent 26 years learning that justice and speed rarely traveled together. But the machine that had been running underneath this town for 4 years was dismantled. The people who had built it were facing federal charges. The families who had been crushed by it had a federal lawsuit with their names on it, and Ruth Chester's meticulous, furious, loving documentation behind every single claim. That was real. That was solid. That was something that couldn't be taken back. On a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks and 1 day after the arrests, Marcus got up before sunrise, dressed quietly, and drove to East Side Cemetery. He had bought white lilies the evening before. The same flower shop, 40 minutes away. The same drive he had made the morning of the funeral. The woman behind the counter had recognized him, had been at the service, had stayed until the end, and had refused to let him pay. He had argued. She had won. The cemetery was empty at this hour. Just the morning light coming through the oak trees in long, slow columns, and the dew still on the grass, and the absolute stillness of a place that has made its peace with every kind of loss. He found Ruth's grave without having to look for it. He had known exactly where it was since the day he stood at its edge in handcuffs and refused to look back at it. He had been carrying its location inside him like a compass point ever since. The headstone was simple, her name, her dates, and underneath, at Velma's insistence, a single line that Ruth had once said in a Sunday school class 20 years ago, and that half the South Side still quoted, "A quiet life is not a small one." Marcus knelt on the grass. He arranged the white lilies carefully against the base of the stone, the way she would have arranged them, not in a hurry, not carelessly, but with intention. Honest flowers, she had called them. Flowers that just show up and do the work. He stayed kneeling for a moment after the flowers were placed. The Georgia morning was warm already, the birds in the oaks finding their rhythms, the light strengthening by degrees. He spoke to her quietly. He told her he had finished what she started, that the machine was down, that the families were going to be okay, not immediately, not without more hard work and more waiting, but okay. He told her the Bramwells had left the motel. He told her that Hollins was running the Oversight Commission, and that she was the right person for it, and Ruth would have known that too. He told her that her evidence, the photographs, the testimonies, the audio recording, the emails she had somehow gotten her hands on and saved to a USB drive she taped to the back of her Bible, had been the thing that broke it open. That all of it, every careful, furious, painstaking piece of it, had mattered. He told her he was sorry he hadn't come home sooner. He wasn't crying. He had done that in private, in her kitchen, in her spare room, in the early morning dark of her porch, when Hargrove was still and quiet, and there was nobody to be composed for. He had done the crying that needed doing, and he had let it be what it was. And now he was here, at the end of it, just a son saying goodbye in the only way that was left to him. "You raised me right, Mama," he said quietly. "I hope you know that." He stood. He straightened his jacket, the same motion, the same two hands pulling the lapels into place that he had made walking out of that precinct 2 weeks ago. He looked at the headstone one last time. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Diane. He answered. "OPR complaint officially withdrawn," she said. "Signed off this morning. No finding, no record, nothing. Clean." A pause. "The director wants to commend you formally. On the record." He's talking about a ceremony. Marcus looked at the lilies against the stone, white and still in the morning air. Honest flowers. "Tell him I was just doing what I was taught," he said. "By my mother." Diane was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had something in it that he didn't hear there often. "I'll tell him," she said softly. "Get some rest, Marcus." He hung up. He stood at his mother's grave for one more moment, just standing, just breathing, just being her son in the quiet Georgia morning, with the light coming through the oaks and the white lilies doing what white flowers do. Then he walked back to his car. He pulled out of the cemetery onto the open road. Hargrove stretched out around him in the early light. The south side streets he had walked, the houses still standing, the community garden that would be replanted, the barber shop that would reopen, the ordinary, beautiful stubbornness of a neighborhood that had refused to disappear. He drove. The Georgia morning opened up wide and bright ahead of him, full of everything that was still possible. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.